Welcome to the Startup Competitors Podcast, where we talk with early-stage entrepreneurs to understand what information they use to inform product roadmap, strategy, and market differentiation.
Today, we're sitting down with Michael Cloran, who is my partner in a number of ventures, and I'll give him a chance to share his background a little bit more. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
All right, man. Let's start with a brief background, like the 15-minute version.
Oh, that's the brief one? I was born a poor... No, let's see. I grew up in Ohio, except for 2 years in Yugoslavia. I then became a complete nerd playing around with an early computer named an Interact. I then decided when I got a chance to go to college that to not go to MIT and learn computers because I just needed to know the business side. So I went to IU and paid out-of-state tuition to learn business finance. When I came out of there, I had a choice to go finance or tech. I went tech with Accenture because I paid my way through college with consulting. And spent a couple of years there learning how the big boys made money consulting, which was not the way I wanted to make money in my life. So I left there because of a consultant that had come through that taught me a lot. And he took me to a job in Germany that paid 6 times my salary, but it was only 1 month long. I figured I had 5 months to find a job when I got back. 3 days later, he introduced me to a job in Dallas at IBM that paid double my salary, so all as a consultant. So I went to Germany for a month. I went to IBM in Dallas. I was there for 4 months when the Germans called back and said, "Hey, you want 6 times your salary?" I was like, "Hell yeah, I do." So I went to California, where it was me and a couple other guys representing the Germans against 5 guys from America, with the Japanese flying over to judge our work in exactly 6 weeks. Unfortunately, we won the competition, so the American guys got laid off and the Germans won the project. I flew back to Germany and helped kick off a project to do gigantic software on blood analyzers. But in the meantime, I'd sold a project to work on ground school for 747 pilots in Florida. So I left the Germans after a couple of months, went to Florida, worked for 8 months at the first startup I'd worked at, and they ran out of money and payment for our invoices. I left with a $40,000 Silicon Graphics workstation that they'd bought as my payment for the final invoice, which at the time was worth less. But I went to New York and started working on a bond trading system where I got my first real equity in a startup. I owned 5% of a bond trading startup that I agreed to work 3,500 hours by doing full-time for a year and half-time for a year. Instead, I just did 3,500 hours in 14 months and built an entire bond trading system that was pretty cool. But the reason I was winding down my work was to launch my own company. And so at the end of that, I had been splitting my time between California and New York to get my wife to agree to marry me, which worked out strangely enough. Ended up starting a company in Chicago to try to kid safe the internet in 1995, which sounds like a tall order. And we had some great ideas and made an unfortunate mistake of not raising venture capital funding to do it, because one of my good mentors at the bond trading software company told me to never have outside investors, always bootstrap. So we started an internet service company to have revenue so we wouldn't have to raise outside investor money. And it just took off so fast that every 6 months we'd wake up and say, maybe we should write that code we talked about. And we never wrote the code because we were so busy just trying to keep up with growth. Grew that to 50 employees and $5 million in revenue, sold it in 1999. Phenomenal time to sell a company. Really bad time to take 75% of your payment in stock and only 25% in cash. So we ended up at a parent company. The parent company told us to grow our company. So in the next 8 months, I took the company we originally founded from 50 people to 110. And I also inherited about 170 people from the parent company that I managed in the call center and the sales space. And I delivered a record turnover of employees quarter. My first quarter was 76 of my 270 employees leaving the first quarter. But we turned around the sales team and I completely broke my original company, going to 110 employees. Had to lay people off back down to 80, one of the most painful experiences I've ever had. But in the middle of it, we ended up selling that company in about a $500 million transaction to a company called RCN that had raised $5.1 billion in the way that you could only raise money in 1999. Paul Allen put in $1.65 billion of that money. And we got the deal done. My mentor who had bought my company, great guy, Bob Curry, taught me a lot. He became vice chairman of RCN. And 6 months later, he calls me and says, get your butt to New Jersey. You get to be in charge of product development, product management for a 7,000 person company. I was 32 years old, in over my head completely. I lasted till 2 years and 10 months on my 3-year contract, decided I was going to leave, had to do a startup again. And there was this tantalizing thing. They had spent $80 million building a combination software company and TV show called JuniorNet. And $30 million of software development. I thought, man, if I could buy that for $500,000, that's got to be a bargain. And I realized that's really bad investment thinking, mostly because I took the old CTO who, us nerds hang together. So I made him CEO, and he just wanted to run the old business model better because now he was in charge. And if you spent $30 million in a business model, it's not working. It's time to make a bigger change than just running it better.
Right.
So I got out of that and got intentional for the first time. I was at home for 7 months. My wife and I decided we were married for better or for worse, but maybe not for lunch. I should get out of the house and do something. And I started a company called Interactions. And that was a big idea to try to make automated voice systems work better by putting human beings behind the scenes, kind of with a sort of game theory AI focus on it, where you would combine the power of humans interpreting human interpretive tasks while machines did the machine tasks that they were good at. I spent 3.5 years, way too much money, way too much of my own money. I had some good friends that invested, just sight unseen, just said, here's some money, and they invested in it, told me to be fair and give them a fair amount of equity. And I did that for 3.5 years and realized I needed real money. And when I went to raise real money, it forced us some life changes, some life questions, because once you take the money from VCs, you're kind of signing up for, well, from your point of view, you have to give them 5 to 7 years. From their point of view, maybe less than that. So I signed up for that and said, I don't want to raise my kids on the East Coast. I want to be back in the Midwest. I had great friends, great church, great school that we had our kids in, but the ethos was just one that money was the measure of success, and we wanted to be back in the Midwest to raise our kids. So I had the awkward conversation to say to my investors, I wanted to spend the first $250,000 they gave me to move the company to the Midwest. And we had we raised $9 million, and we moved the company to the Midwest. Thank God our investors had also invested in a Primo. I got to meet Bill Godfrey through them, and we moved here, didn't know anybody in Indianapolis. We'd analyzed Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and Chicago, fell in love with Indianapolis as a great place to raise our 4 boys. So we got here and moved into a fancy office because we had to recruit people. And we thought office was a good way to recruit people. So we got an office at Clay Terrace above the Joseph A. Bank clothing store and with walking distance restaurants, and started hiring people. And once again, grew a company to about 100 employees, and I broke it. And that's the second time I learned that I'm probably not the guy to, when the employee handbook shows up, it's probably when I should exit. So at that point, we had raised $22 million, and I'd called my investors and said, I'm not the guy to run it. And they said, you're right, you're not the guy to run it. So I ran it for another year and raised another $10 million, got to $32 million, and we blew up in one of the most painful days of my life when Capital One called us and said, for every $1 million that we spend with you, we save between $5 and $6 million, and you're fired. And I said, wait, I'm trouble with the math. And they just said, yeah, we just can't handle downtime, 4 hours every 6 weeks. Go grow up for 2 or 3 years and come back, because we could spend 60 or 70 million with you and save $300 million with this amazing automated voice technology that we had Apple Computer using as for the main money under my Apple. And that's the moment that we brought in the executive in residence, who showed up and said, sure, I will help fix the operational problems. Within a month, he was like, this is the coolest tech I've ever seen. I want to stay. And I was a wind-up sales doll to go out and try to sell the vision and the technology. And so after a few months, I left. And that was 2009. My wife was saying, maybe you should get a job. I was saying, I don't want to get a job. I want to keep trying to build cool things. So I figured I should launch 3 companies at once, because what are the odds all 3 would fail? Also bad investment thinking. So I launched a company called UFlavor that needed $30 million capital, just like my original company Interactions had needed. And that wasn't going to happen in 2009, 10, 11 when the economy was down. I launched a company called Stuff Raiser, which was to help not-for-profits not have another fundraiser, but have a stuff raiser, and we'll help you turn stuff into cash, which went on and had an interesting history we can talk about later. And I started DeveloperTown, which really was probably the clearest focus on strengths, which was my ego was pretty painfully damaged after raising $32 million and not succeeding at building a company to get off the ground. But I realized I'm pretty good at the beginning part, where you figure out the whole technology, product market fit and match. And I decided that DeveloperTown would be a great place to do that. And I went to some great people named, Mike Kelly and Jason Vasquez that I'd worked with, who taught me a lot about technical debt and code bases and how to pivot and have a code base able to pivot into product market fit, and said, I need somebody just like you to start a company with me. Do you know anybody? And I got the answer I wanted, which was, what about me? And those great guys decided to quit Interactions in some other places, and they came over and we launched in 2010. And from there, we grew a company, which I don't know if the story's been told on the podcast before, but we grew a company that started out servicing startups and smaller companies and delivered $1 million our first year and $1.6 million and 2.2 and 3.2. And about that point, we realized a couple of things. We'd underestimated the amount of capital it was going to take to grow a services business. And we'd underestimated the difficulty of working largely with startups as clients who, A, don't pay their bills, and B, when a startup that's in the technology space runs out of money and you're the development arm, you're the one that has to be the Grim Reaper and cut them off. So I think you remember that famous conversation we had at an offsite where we said we wanted a lifestyle business with equity upside, but not this lifestyle.
I do.
And that's when we were blessed that the universe answered with some great corporate clients who wanted to launch big products. And we started working with more and more corporate clients to help them move like a startup and launch products, and they could actually pay their bills. And that kicked off a nice round of growth for us. We grew that business then from 3.2 to 4.4 million, 5.8 million, and had a huge growth year, 46% to 8.2 million in 2016. And in the middle of 2016, I launched, I guess, was probably my fifth core business that I've ever launched. And that was DT Starts, where we decided to peel a team off that would be investment strategy 2.0. And we would make it very clear that we were investing as co-founders in businesses. And we launched that in the middle of 2016. And we delivered in 2017 about $2.5 million worth of work directly for equity with no cash involved. Part of our charter, as you know, at DT Starts is to not take cash for our work, but only take equities so that we're completely aligned with founders and other outside investors, which is a key distinction from the early days of DeveloperTown, where investors were worried about the conflict of interest. There's no conflict of interest now. We're completely focused. And brings us to today. We had a solid 2017. Cash consulting was about the same size, $8 million, and the start side delivered about $2.5 million worth of services to startups in exchange for equity. So I like to think of us as a $10.5 million firm, but the cash flow was only 8.2 or something in there, and that's where we are.
Awesome. You're 2 minutes early.
It's 13 minutes? That was not 13 minutes.
That was 13 minutes.
No way. You said 15, so there you go. Over promise, under deliver.
All right. So,
oh wait, do that the other way.
Do that the other way. Okay. So let's take those in reverse order, if that's okay.
Sure.
And I'm going to try really hard to ask you questions you've never heard me ask.
Uh-oh.
So it could have a little bit of fear for you, but hopefully this comes across as pretty authentic. So talk to me about Starts. Why did you think the timing was right for us to move into Starts? And for you personally, what was the motivating factor to go after it?
Oh boy, there's a lot wrapped up in that. One, I think burnout, fear, and opportunity probably would be the way I would describe it. So the burnout side was during 2012, 13, and 14, we had underestimated how much capital would take to grow a consulting firm. And I think the famous run in 2014, we had 11 payrolls in a row where the check we needed to make payroll came in between 1 and 5 days before payroll. Like I had plan C and plan D and plan E, but those are never fun when you get down to plan C and plan D to make payroll. But it was that year took multiple years off the end of my life. I'm sure of it. It was pretty brutal. And I think in that world, it actually matters if you can do the work of 3 people and save $100,000 or $200,000 of expense because you're right on the edge of making payroll. And I've been doing that for 3 or 4 or 5 years. I've been working a lot of hours. And so burnout was a big part of it, saying, I can't keep doing 3 jobs at once and we've got to do it. The fear side was we were approaching that magical 50 employee mark where the handbook is going to show up and we have to start having the employee handbook. And I knew from the past that those are the times when I've broken companies and that I should try to find a way to detach and get myself out of it. And then to let you run the ball, like to let you take the ball and run it, because if I looked at you and I in a room together and I said, who would I bet on to run a 50-person company that could be on its way to making a 250-person company, I'd bet on you, not myself, all day long. So that was the sort of fear-driven piece of it. And the opportunity was, along the way, by 2016, I had seen my old company, Interactions, raise money at a $650 million valuation. So, yes, I screwed up the company, and it could have reached that point 4 years earlier if maybe I hadn't screwed up the operational issues and some of the tech pieces. But it was like, man, that's real money, right? That's amazing. And that's huge wealth. And I've seen the power of equity, even the bond trading system that we built. I owned 5% of it, and it was worth, we had an offer of $25 million on the table. Now we held out and sold it for $4 million a few years later. But it was amazing to just watch the value of equity in something that delivers true economic rent and economic wealth. And I said, wow, I would much rather have that opportunity where we keep doing this for other companies and helping them build strategic technology. Why aren't we trying to have that opportunity? So it was all those three things. As you know, I'd been pushing for it for a while, and I'd always heard next year. And by 2016, I think my burnout level reached a level that I said, I just have to do this because otherwise I'm going to break. And I don't think that's going to work out well for anybody. That happens.
How is Starts funded? Talk a little bit about where the money comes from for you to be able to make those investments.
Yeah. So we looked at it and said, look, we could take a reasonably profitable consulting firm and take the cash out and pay taxes on the money. And then we'd probably turn around and write checks to angel investments. And we'd done a lot of angel investing in 2010, 11, and 12 of different sorts. And we'd seen a lot of friends and people who advised make those investments. And writing checks as an angel investor is a dangerous game, right? It's a very difficult thing to make money at. Instead, with Starts, my opinion is that we can take what we're really good at. We can take some employees and salaries and things that we can fund out of those profits, and we can directly apply our trade. But coming with applying our trade is we're also deeply involved as co-founders. And one of the early things we had to establish with our co-founded companies is we're making 3-year commitments. We're going to invest with them along the way. And they have to treat us as co-founders, because one of the things that we saw along the way was lots of mistakes where founders who were paying us money to do the builds would build the wrong thing, or would not test it before they built it, or wouldn't, run a startup competitors report and figure out what the competitors were doing before they did it. We wanted to be not in a service provider relationship, but in a co-founder relationship where you could have the typical push and pull and arguments and love fest that comes with co-founding and do it. And so in doing that, we said, okay, how do we do that? And we basically took money from DT and we said, we're going to invest $2.4 million a year, ish. Turns out longer than a year to get invested because we had to find the right deals. In these companies, we have group 1 and group 2. And we said, why don't we sell off 25% of our upside? So we raised about $1.2 million from outside investors. I've only raised money 3 times in my life for something. It was basically Interactions, Stuff Raiser, and then this. And as a fundraise, we only talked to 16 investors. 9 of them have written checks. We've raised $1.2 million. And that's about a quarter of our upside. We decided, 3-4 months ago, you know what? We'd rather have a team that can overinvest, because we promised our companies 3,000 hours. We end up just doing 4,000, 4,500 hours. It's one where I probably got the game theory wrong because, that's a complicated answer. But anyway, so we raised $1.2 million from outside investors. We have money coming over from the DT side, and we have a lot of just support from the mothership that is DT in terms of space and advice and people and all that good stuff. So that's how we're funding it. And we decided that owning 75% of our upside was great, but a few months ago we said maybe we should own 65% of our upside, and that way we can have 13, 14 people on our team instead of 10 people, and we can continue over investing like we have been. And we all said we'd rather own 65% of the upside and overinvest in each of the companies in terms of our efforts and time, because if we don't do it, no one's going to do it in many of these companies. And so we went ahead and decided to raise another $600,000 from investors and sell off that next 10%.
One of the things I neglected to ask that I probably should have opened with, because I do this with most of the people who are most of the founders who are on with their companies, hit us with some quick vanity metrics around Starts. Like, how many companies have you worked with? How much money have you raised total? You've hit some of these already. How big is the team? But paint a picture real quick of like current status.
Yeah, Starts is a team of 13 folks. We've got 5.5 developers, a designer, 4 what we call business Turks or future CEOs. We have one meta project manager, and we have me.
And you have a sales guy in there now too, right?
Yeah, that's one of the Turks. Maybe that makes 5. We got whatever adds up to 13. Oh, we have Daria, who's our sort of multi-company CTO that's leading the team of developers. So that's the team, and the idea is we're the multi-headed co-founder, the Voltron co-founder, where basically, having a co-founder that can do everything is a hard person to find. I always joke there's only one Sergey Brin, polymath, who could do it all. But we can be that multi-headed co-founder and simulate that by saying, oh, yeah, when you need us to be a designer, we can suddenly be Adam, who has 20 years of designing startup stuff. And if you need us to be developers, you have Daria, who's done 30 different startup projects over the last 15 years and has all sorts of experience there. And if you need somebody to be a CFO or an advisor, you have me, who's done pro formas and raised money and done all that stuff. So we can basically become a multi-headed co-founder. We act as one co-founder. We kind of simulate it by saying, our first year we're going to deliver 2,500 hours, which really means to put 2,500 hours into a time tracking system means you really work like 3,500 hours. So we're like super busy co-founder, the co-founder that's working themselves to death right alongside of you as the founder. But that's made up of lots of different people doing it. We have 8 companies that we've made investments in. We have across the companies, they'll sound pretty anemic as revenue, but I think we're coming close to the $200,000 a month in revenue across all the 8 companies. And you got to realize a lot of these are SaaS companies where breaking through that $20,000 a month level, that $10,000 a month level are huge milestones. A lot of SaaS companies have taken 2 years to get there. We have a couple companies right at the $20,000 a month level. We have one company we're only 7 months into that just broke $10,000 a month in recurring revenue. And then we have 3 that are still hunting for the business model. We have one in the super hot, fun, fancy, fun to play with VR, XR, AR space that's doing right now about $3,000 a month in revenue recurring, but we're hoping to turn that around. I
love the VR, AR company. I'm still waiting for my blockchain company. You've got to go find one of those.
Yeah, I don't have one of those yet.
And we need...
I did turn one down, though, the other day.
And what? And we need an artificial intelligence big data play. You need one of those too. You don't really have that yet.
Yeah, I'm waiting on at least 3 of the companies have a plan that once they get enough traction to generate data, they're going to put AI
You can't use it sensibly to support a fundamentally sound business model. That's not an artificial intelligence company. I'm looking for we just do it because we do it company. You got to find that.
I have this really, really painful habit of saying that we have to get into our companies first before we worry about making it artificial, put the AI in place. So, and I think that's actually a key technique is to actually, if you build a company where you understand where are we adding intelligence to this process in a way that helps us build a moat and stand out from competitors, the A in that is when you have enough data finally, it can give you that last 20% edge. But it's about the 20% edge. If you start adding it before you have that 80% done, it doesn't do anything.
Awesome. All right. So rewind a little bit. You were about to say something really awesome where you got the game theory wrong. And then you said that's too complicated and you moved on. I want to pick at that scab a little bit.
Yeah, that's painful. So a lot of the investors that are along for the ride with us, along with DT and Starts, are good friends of mine. And I basically said, look, I'm doing this as an experiment. I'm going to do these first 2 groups of companies. So the first group of companies, we had to put on paper something that defined what it meant to be a co-founder and why somebody would give us 15 to 45% of their company. And we decided we'd define an hours like a consulting company. And we'd said, look, it's a 3-year commit. For 3 years, we're going to give you at least 20 hours a month at the baseline. That's just enough to make sure that we can, be an outsourced CTO, make sure that architecture is correct, make sure processes are followed, all that. And then the first year, we would give another 2,500 hours on top of it because the first year is when we can really help with product market fit and all that. So we basically said to if you were a startup CEO, we'd say, look, we're going to give you 3,000 hours. It's probably going to be 4,000 or 4,500, which was borne out to be true. Therefore, you should give us 34% of your company. And because this is the equivalent of a massive first seed round. So you with some friends and family funding to get through the next 12 to 18 months, us coming in, we don't have to raise money until we could be all the way at beginnings of traction and scale. And you're going to raise money at anywhere from 2.5 to 5 million plus in pre-money valuation. Whereas if you raise money today, you're going to maybe be lucky to justify $1 million, $1.5 million, if you can even raise it, and you're going to spend a ton of time doing it. So we set that as the offer to our entrepreneurs. And then the offer to investors was, hey, there's no possible way we could value these companies. You're riding along with us, but we have to give you some kind of valuation to judge it. So we said, look, we're just going to take each one of these deals we do and say it's worth $400,000. And the answer is, look, I can probably deliver this $400,000 deal at 4,000 hours, and we take a bunch of risk on the ones that break and fall out. I could probably deliver it with $250,000, $300,000 of hard costs, maybe a little bit more if you factor in some of the indirect costs of DT. But we're not charging you $220. There's no VC fees. There's none of that. You get to ride along, and we're taking a bunch of risk. It's a great deal for you guys. We'll fix the valuation at $400,000. So now play that tape forward. So now you've hit your limit. You've hit 3,500 hours, 4,000 hours with the company. You own 34% of this company. You've told your investors the fixed valuation is $400,000. And you look at this company, you're like, oh, we could do that for them. That would be amazing. But who's going to pay for it? Well, the entrepreneur, there's no mechanism to go back to the entrepreneur and say, you got to give us more equity for for the extra hours we're giving you. So that's like there. You can't do anything there. You can't go to investors and say, well, we're investing more, so we're just going to raise the valuation to $500,000. Like we already wrote in a document, it's $400,000. It's like a full anti-dilution protection for the investors. But yet, like unilateral free trade sometimes works out where like, wow, that's really great for that other person, but it's actually even good for me too. So it actually sometimes makes sense to do unilateral free trade, even though it feels wrong. It's kind of like that. It's like, well, I'm going to go ahead and do this because my 34% justifies doing this investment, but no one else gets hurt. The entrepreneur doesn't give any more equity. The investors don't get diluted at all. So when we decide to sell 10% more of our upside, it's still at that fixed $400,000. We're still letting new investors come in at the same valuation. We're the only ones taking dilution. So when we came to group 2, we said we got to fix that a little bit. And we did make a mechanism to say to our investors, look, we're going to value our base deal at $400,000. And if we decide to go overboard with a given company.
This is where small, medium, large came from.
Right. Now we can do a half deal. So we can tack on another deal and we can make a deal with the entrepreneur and say, look, we'll give you 1,500 more hours, which can help solve those problems we would have solved, but you got to give us another slug of equity. We might do it at a higher valuation now because it's a year later and we've made the company worth a lot more, but we're going to do that. And we say to our investors, look, if we're willing to do it and we're willing to take that deal and get more equity, then you should be willing to ride along. So now our investors in the round 2, we may only have 4 or 5 companies in group 2 because some of those are now $600,000 deals instead of just being $400,000 deals because it represents the additional equity that we've gotten from that extra piece. So we fixed the game theory a little bit, but it's still just a little bit. It's still hard to have those conversations when you get to an entrepreneur and they've been getting the free milk for a while of us going over 3,500 and 3,800 hours, and then you say, "Now give us equity for it." They're like, "No, I don't want you to just keep giving me free milk." So it's very hard to have those conversations. So in advance we've realized some of the deals are just bigger. So at the very beginning we just say, "Hey, we'll come all in, but it's going to be a deal and a half." So that's how I got the game theory wrong. But I promised all my investors group 1 and group 2 would be done the same way. But I've also warned them all group 3 is going to be a different deal. So once we get to group 3, we'll figure it out. Either we're going to self-fund it ourselves completely, or we're going to find a mechanism that makes that work out better for everybody.
Talk to me a little bit about deal selection and maybe a little bit more specifically, the first group 1, the companies that you brought in there. Maybe start with some high-level generic stuff of like, we had to sift through X companies to find those deals, and this is roughly the process we followed. And then more interesting is then how did that change, that experience, then how did that change how you attacked group 2? And then what do you think will be different when you think about group 3? So like how has your thinking about deal selection changed over time?
I'd started in late 2015 planning and trying to make this thing happen in 2016. We started July 1st of 2016 was our official start date. And we did make a mistake. I had built up 4 deals that we had kind of hunted for 8 months. And starting them made it feel suddenly like a class. Like we did not want to have an accelerated classes. We wanted to only make investments when we found a great deal.
And I just want to make a quick clarification there. When you say you had gone out and hunted for them, for people who may be listening, there was no application process. You didn't do a big general announcement with a form you could fill out. It wasn't like you got 200 startup ideas pitched to you. You almost hand selected those.
This was of the
starts.
During that time period of those 8 months, we probably saw 25, 35 deals at DT, and we picked out the 4 that we did. And that's been a bit of a conscious decision, is to say, look, we have a very small team. We could devote an enormous amount of effort to filtering 400 startups or 200 startups and filtering through them all. And we really look at it and say, taking a lot of that effort and filtering only 35 instead of 200 and finding the best of it means we get back all the time we would have spent filtering through those other 165 applications. We can pre-select for some target filtering of people that are here in town, so we get the benefit of working directly with them day in and day out, which prevents an enormous number of problems of working with over a 3-year period with companies that aren't local.
Right.
And we think those trade-offs are worth filtering a smaller number to get to the number we want. But the story was we started with 4, which made it feel like a class, like an accelerated class, and it's really meant to be rolling. So we also were a startup serving startups. So all of the first round, those first 4, we gave them 14 months instead of 12 months. We gave them a bunch of extra hours because for the first 2 months we sucked. We just didn't know what we were doing. We were a startup trying to figure it out. And then it took us 8 months to make our next investment. We added one company March 1st. And then another 3 months to June 1st, and another 3 months 2 months, I guess, to August, and then a month to September. And then we haven't touched another deal for 7 months. We haven't done another deal. 8 months now, going on 8 months, because we've just been so focused on those, and we've gone through a lot of deals. We've said no to a lot of deals. And I think if you ask me what changed, the first round of deals, we were easy. There's people in town that make investments that would ask for 3 times the equity we asked for our first 4 companies. So we did not get nearly the equity we deserved, but it's okay. We were trying to figure out, could we even do this? Could we be a multi-headed co-founder, and could we deliver it and do that? Our next couple deals, we self-generated one of the deals with a team member that had been with us for a year, and we validated the idea and spun it out. So we own a much bigger percentage there. We had one that was a longtime collaborator at DT that wanted to be a chief scientist, not a CEO, that we took on at a 50-50 joint venture kind of style. And in group 3, we suddenly started finding companies. There's 2 things that happened. One was we found our ideal co-founder who'd been at it for 2.5 years, had figured out a product, had figured out a market, knew how to sell it. And when we joined up in September, that's the one that in 7 months, we've already broken $10,000 a month recurring revenue. We have a product that right now generates $5,000 per sale. And we think the hidden value in every one of those sales is $5,000 to $10,000 of high revenue, of high margin add-on revenue, and the equivalent of probably $10,000 of customer acquisition costs that are out of the way for this sort of long-term service. So that one, when he saw the team that we had built and our capabilities, and we were a much more mature organization, it really, the power of what we could be was revealed, and we were able to get a dramatically better deal, probably double what we would have gotten in terms of equity even a year before when we were beginning. And then we also did a deal that was a little different, was a company that already had $100,000 a month recurring revenue, but had a really dramatically crippled product. And the question was, what's it like to go in and work with a team of 9 people instead of 1 or 2 or 3 co-founders that you're going to work with? What's it like to work with a team of 9 people? And so you asked me what's going to be different going forward. The team of 9 people, it's been amazing to watch the skills that our team has developed and all the things we've absorbed from DT and learned, how much those can be amplified when you have a team of 9 able to deliver on all the fronts. So we're looking at a couple deals now. We have one that already has $4 million a year in revenue, who's talking about a significant chunk of equity because they see the skills that we bring are completely lacking, and they could go try to hire those skills as, hiring an agency, hiring a software development firm, start doing that. But they know that there's tremendous risks unless they hire DeveloperTown, but there's tremendous risks in each of those places when you hire someone who's concerned about billable dollars, billable hours versus someone who's never going to get paid except with results. And they're considering giving up far beyond the amount of equity that they might give up if they just raised the money and hired someone, because they would get a partner that's completely paid as a partner, as a co-founder. So I think you asked me what's going to be different. I bet you we start sprinkling in more deals that already have $1 million or $2 million or $4 million of revenue, but desperately need what we can provide, which is that sort of multifaceted co-founder that can drive the business in a way they haven't been able to with their own team yet. And then I also think we'll do a little more hunting maybe than we have, and find more deals like the one where we have someone with a well-defined product and can get to $10,000 a month in recurring revenue inside of 7 months. And by the way, I think that business, our goal is $20,000 by the end of this college semester. So by May, we think we'll be at $20,000 a month recurring revenue. And by end of next year, it sounds completely crazy, but I think there's a chance we'll be breaking $1 million a year in recurring revenue on the base product before we do all the add-ons.
So I joked about this earlier with blockchain and artificial intelligence and VR, but is there a thesis where you think from a industry or vertical selection, when you look at deal selection, does anything play into like verticals, industry based, tech behind the scenes where your team might have strengths that you factor that stuff in? Or is it just a blank canvas and it's like, we'll look at any deal, and if we feel like it's the right team and the right, and we can bring the right skills to bear, that we'll take it on. Do you guys talk about at all, like where you might have a concentration of experience or skills or talent that would make you more successful in one place versus another?
Yeah, I think I'd love to claim that intentionality, but it's kind of interesting that concentrations have almost just appeared by chance. It turns out of our 8 companies, we have 3 that have significant photography focus in it. So we have a studio management platform. We have a very unique, sort of tech-enabled photography service that could grow to a national tech-enabled photography service. And we have a photography education company that's teaching educators and teaching high-end photography. And then it turns out we also have employee and talent development in there. So we have a combination of employee, applicant tracking, onboarding, and employee information system that's all about growing and building your talent. We have an executive leadership development program that's all about growing the leaders in your company so you can deliver the things you want. And we have, VR training to try to develop people in a emotionally laden training kind of situations by using VR to create the power of that sort of emotional situation. So oddly enough, we ended up with a pretty high concentration, 3 of 8 in those 2 areas. I don't know how much it's affecting our focus going forward in an intentional way, but the company that has $4 million in revenue, half of it comes from selling education. So that would be 4 of 9 suddenly would be deeply involved in the education space and driving that. And I would mention also that we have one of the things that we absorbed was a online education company that last year we sold $750,000 worth of piano lessons to people. So I guess in the education space, that could put us at 5 of 10, really, if you put that in there too, right? So it's interesting that we found that. I think going in our sort of, if you asked me to narrow it down, I would say it was mostly B2B software as a service kind of services, or maybe B2B tech-enabled service would be a better way. And I think every one of our companies has fit that model. So even the one fintech play we have is really not B2C. It's a fintech that's sold to banks and community banks and credit unions. They're the ones that are the real buyers of the service. And then there is a B2B2C component where it's the end consumer can buy it. But I think that's selling valuable software to organizations so that B2B SaaS play is really what our core focus is.
Early on in DeveloperTown, when you and I really started working closely together for the first time, our roles naturally emerged where you ended up doing quite a bit more sales than I did, and I ended up doing quite a bit more project management than you did. And so a pretty classic pattern was you would form the relationship, close a deal, then they would meet Mike Kelly, and then I would walk them through the client onboarding process and then work with them going forward. You would be involved.
Let me introduce you to the grown-up, Mike Kelly, who can actually get this done.
Then you would be involved early on in ideation and defining the product and the roadmap and where things needed to go, but then you would largely disappear, rinse and repeat. And what that meant typically was myself, Mitch, Jason, to some extent, like we would end up managing a lot of the actual projects in terms of execution. One of the things that's been interesting for me to watch from a distance with Starts is, I know Matt stepped up into that role a little bit, or maybe a lot, but early on, you just jumped straight into managing and leading the 4 or 5 companies who came in out of the gate, which I think has been a relatively new experience for you. And I still see you struggling with some of that a little bit now that you don't have 4 companies, you have 8, 10, depending on how you count, right? Like
most we have 9. We haven't done that deal yet.
Okay.
To make 10.
So talk to me a little bit about what you've learned over the last couple of years about juggling multiple projects and maybe what you still need to learn. But I would be really interested now that you're kind of in that role, which I think is a relatively new role for you. Not that you're not always doing multitasking and, doing 3 jobs like you said earlier, but this is a little bit different in that it's not just your own work and your own output, right? It's the team's work and the client expectations and all the things that go into that. Like, how has that been as a learning curve for you? What do you think you've taken out of that?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would tell you is I'm extremely grateful every day for the things that I learned from you and Jason and Julie and watching what it takes to deliver, because I think I would have stubbed all my toes, not just half of them, on those processes. I'm amazed how much just those experiences of doing 200 projects at DeveloperTown, even though I largely disappeared and was off ideating, just being around and absorbing it was great. And then I'm amazed at how hard it is to get that knowledge disseminated to a team and to get it across. In the early days, I was amazed that I could go on a whiteboard and draw out the hey, we actually have to do a low technical debt code base, and we have to operate it, and we have to operate it 24/7. And just walking through, you remember the board of red outside my office of the 4 main stages of running it, right? Like you have to quality define the requirements, and you have to build the code, and you have to then have the whole code quality build, deploy, test model, and then you have to have the 24/7 operations model. And I could describe all of it, but I couldn't get a team to do it. And then Daria really came in and stepped up, and I think he's done an amazing job of trying to standardize that and get it going from sort of the technical side. But he now is in I'm doing this for 8 companies. I have to get all 8 companies to come along with this. And you get the resistance of the young'uns who are always smarter than you and think that what you're doing just slows them down, and they're much smarter than you. And you get the take your eye off the ball. And suddenly it's like, how did we end up with only 58% test coverage when we were at 92 last time I looked? Like, what happened, right? So you get all those things. And I think Daria is really struggling with how do you be a multi-company CTO, which is what Jason Vasquez did for 2010, 2011, 2012 at DT, right? He's learning those lessons at, I think, probably double the pace because he has Jason Vasquez to go talk to and ask questions to and learn that fast. And then I am still struggling with how do you convince these companies that have different cultures and different people to start running the sort of well-known pieces. And there's that struggle between the
well-known pieces. What do you mean?
We know we're building a product. We know we have a roadmap. We know we have a backlog. We should be running 2-week sprints and doing it. Yet in the startup world, the 2-week sprint can be a recipe for slowness sometimes. It can just be like, stop. You just sit in a room for 2 hours and just tweak that stuff out. Because if it's a series of sprint tasks and stories, it's going to burn 80 hours in the sprint or 40 hours in the sprint. And literally it would be done in maybe 4 hours because I'm a developer and you always double estimates. But it's amazing where you can let a process that is well known and works well in a multi-member team, when you have 6 or 8 people working on the same code base and cranking, it works well. You want to translate that down, but then all of a sudden you start finding out, and it works well and it prevents, say, coder burnout, but that's not the most important thing when you're a startup and it's suddenly taking you 4 weeks to get something that should be deployed in 4 days. And I think that has been, for me, is still a struggle that I'm struggling with, is how do you, I think you've called it in the past, like tech debt is not like, it's not like heroin, like, never, not even once. Tech debt is like, in a startup world, you need to sometimes take tech debt. There's valid tech debt.
It's aspirin. Yeah.
As long as you're aware that you're taking the tech debt on and you have a plan to deal with it and you don't let it spin out of control and, repossess your car, repossess your code base, I guess. Like that to me has been the big thing to learn along the way. So I'm still struggling with those things. Literally as late as 2 months ago on an offsite, we were just talking about how do we structure this work to balance those two tensions between not burning out developers with daily pivot swing changes, but not turning it into a recipe for a ton of inter team member communication overhead that, and documentation that slows everything down much slower than startup pace. So still struggling would be my answer to that one.
Interesting. If you had to don't think of specific team members here. This is an interesting thought experiment. If you had to take 1 or 2 team members, whether they're a couple of the growth engineers or Matt or Daria or whoever, and you were going to send them off somewhere to learn a new skill. So they're going to go to IDEO for a week and learn human-centered design, or they're going to go to the Project Management Institute and learn classic project management skills. They're going to go learn conflict resolution so they can better deal with angry customers. So you can send them anywhere. They're going to go study with the best in the world about that thing. Where do you think you would send them? Like what would be the missing skill right now that you, or maybe not missing, but the one that you would want to invest in the most as you think of, okay, we're getting ready to add 4 more companies on top of the 9 we have. We need to level up in this space.
Another great question. I think on the developer side, so one of the things that I think we learned after a number of years at DeveloperTown was the collaboration between developer and designer can cut your build time by 1/3 or 2/3 if you collaborate.
Amen.
And if developers instead take the designs as requirements tossed over the wall and I just need to build that, you find, the other day I sat down next to a developer and I was like looking at the code. I'm like, what's going on there? And it was like, well, in this instance, I do that. In this instance, I do this. So I've got this whole branch through my code. And I'm all through the code. You had these like 2 cases. And I was like, why? And I found out it was like, well, in one instance, the designer had this thing done here. And in this other instance, it was like 6 pixels higher. And so you had the small version and the large version all through this JavaScript component painting it. And like, why didn't you just go to the designer and say, can I make them the same size? And your code would be like simplified by half, right? Like, and the developer looked at me like, what do you mean? Like, that was the spec. It came out of Zeppelin. That was the size. I built it. Like, right. And at the same time, he was also, sometimes the little component on the screen had 2 lines of text, and sometimes it had 1 line of text. And it had 1 line of text if the choice was no one had made a choice. And it had 2 lines of text if they'd made a choice. And I'm like, if you just put the word none for no choice, and then you let the other ones be the choice, it would always be 2 lines of text, and you'd only write one version of this component. You wouldn't have to write the component as I need to do all the math for centering it vertically when it's 1 line and centering it over 2 line. Like, you get all this extra complexity. I'm like, just put the word none there, and it's probably good enough. But that's a design decision. The design decision was not present if not chosen. Put the word there if it is chosen. And it's like, or you could just push back. So that, I think, is one. And that's tightly coupled with, on developer side, of I want to solve a problem, and so I've got the specification, and then I will go through the brick wall to solve it that way instead of going around the brick wall. We had a challenge, and a developer was going to solve it, and instead of pausing and saying, man, that's much harder than we thought, it ended up where he was trying to detect an event in a live video stream using OCR recognition stuff, when there was an alternate where you could say, oh, or we could back up, do some Googling, and an hour or 2 later, we're like, oh yeah, there's this different event that's thrown off that you can just detect the event much easier than OCRing a character set that might change in the future. And it's that piece. So I think for developers, that developer designer interaction, to say one of the core things here is simplicity of code. not just simplicity of design. We need to make sure those work together. So that would be one skill set on the developer side. But again, no fault of our own. We have a lot of young developers who are doing amazing jobs.
Michael,
getting things done.
What you just described is a challenge every single software development team on the planet has. Yeah, yes. That's like, yeah. It
took us a few years at the core DT consulting side to get that collaboration to start happening, right? Yeah, where the developers push back, and it was some of the seniors that did it. And I don't have very many seniors. Daria does it because he's a senior. He's done it for a long time, but
he's only on like eight companies.
He's got 8 companies, so it's hard to do it for all of them. Yeah, and I think on the Turks side, we've got some real specialties developing in sort of early company sales, because that's a different challenge than sales. Normally, when you have a defined product, you can do sales training and learn all the techniques and how to read a prospect and how to do objection handles and how to do closes. When you're doing startup sales, it's like, no, the purpose of this sale is not necessarily just to sell you the product. It's also to figure out how I have to modify the product to sell it to you, right? That's how I call that discovery sales, right? And that, I think we've got some expertise developing there. We've got some great expertise in analytics. But I think the biggest thing that develops that we've noticed, we were interviewing some new future CEOs or Turks, and we turned out, we had a couple that had been there for a year, and actually our Turk emeritus Jacob showed up, and the 3 of them had been there for a year, and I turned them loose, and the things that they described that they learned in a year of how to look at a startup pitch so fundamentally different than everybody else does. Everybody else hears the pitch and is like, you're right. There totally should be an Uber for VR headsets, which I heard tonight, by the way, at Fisher's. Somebody actually pitched, I'm the Uber for VR headset. So I'm like, okay, like that's their reaction to that, right?
Sorry, I need a minute.
Their reaction to that is just like, now they're like, oh, you're building a marketplace startup. You do realize that if your value in a marketplace startup needs, if side A needs a lot of side B to have value and side B needs a lot of side A to have value, you have to build both sides that simultaneously.
You're building 2 startups.
And you need such massive scale on both sides that you can't solve it without $40 million, and you don't have $40 million. So find a way to unroll the market versus your answer that everyone gives. No, I'm doing a geographic launch strategy. I'm going to launch city by city where I can get scale in each city on both sides, and then it'll work out great, like Uber did with $40 billion of capital, or $10 billion of capital. Like Uber's still losing money because launching new markets where you have to get scale on both sides, you have enough drivers and enough riders to make sense in a market, is enormously expensive. And every startup entrepreneur who's thinking about a marketplace startup lives in the world of where both sides are great. Look at all the things that are possible. And now the Turks listen to it and they're just like, that's great. You're right. It'll be amazing when we get there. We can't get there from here. How about we work on one side of the market, find a unit economics that work, see if we can build one side. How about we build tools for photographers, and when we get to 5,000 photographers paying us money, enough money that we can afford to buy more photographers, then we can launch the consumer photography purchasing side and actually launch the consumer market. But if you launch the simultaneous launch of consumer photography purchasing with professional photographers, just make sure you have $20 million, because otherwise you're never going to get scaled to have it work.
I got to get you angry. This is the most excited you've been this entire podcast.
Well, anyway, the Turks have learned that, and I don't know if I could send them anywhere for training. on that. If there's a way I could rapid train that with the new ones, it'd be great. But it's just amazing to watch that sort of that coupled with the critical design thinking of when somebody says something like yes, and then you don't understand. The users every day will just get up and fire up our app and enter their 3 prayers and their 2 meditations that they did. And you're like, yeah, human beings don't work like that. They no longer believe what, this pitch that people are making, because it's just nonsense. It's just like, we're going to need to find, we spent over $500,000 designing and doing user testing to try to get with a major pharma company on the DT side to try to get diabetics to do something that would save their life or prevent their feet from falling off. And it's an amazing motivational problem to get them to do something even once a day that could do that. And just to think that they're going to do it because of their love of cats every day, like it's just not going to happen, right?
Well, it's got cute emojis. You don't understand what people will do for cute emojis.
True. Yes.
I think I got my last question for starts, and then we're going to rewind a little bit more. So for starts, give me something that has happened over the last 2 years that was completely unexpected, like, and maybe in a delightful way? Like, what's something that either you've learned or relationships that you've formed or something that you've discovered in the community or with your founders that, like, going in, you didn't predict it and you don't think you could have, and you're just pleased that you found it?
I'll give you two. One was, when we started Starts, we took on the project of the piano education project that we had. Completely unexpected was our co-founder, our 50-50 joint venture partner, Sky Houston, is a great guy, went and just out of his own pocket without telling us, which we eventually paid him back for out of the startup course, went and spent $8,000 hiring a guy that helped him build a complete webinar marketing track. And it broke every rule, every conventional wisdom rule. It was an hour and 40-minute long webinar before the first call to action to spend money was an hour and 40 minutes in, where we're trying to take videos and say 60 seconds is too long. No one will watch 60 seconds. We got to get to 45 seconds. Hour and 40 minutes in, and crushed it. And that startup went from cruised along at $100K a year, $120K a year of revenue to suddenly we did $750,000 last year. And it was because he unilaterally went and just said, I'm just going to try this and I'm just going to go do it. And I don't need to, I'm going to risk my own money because it's so risky. I don't even want to try to talk to my partner about it first, which, by the way, he should talk to us about it first because we'd love to go along for those rides. And I was amazed, and that was delightful. And it really changed some of our perception about what's possible in the combination of Facebook marketing. After spending $300,000 in Facebook marketing and understanding what's possible there, it really leveled up our team. The other one was, the delightful thing was walking into a company that was just completely crippled by the technology and the technologists that had sort of built the classic developer fiefdom, right? And it caused a lot of damage and pain to the rest of the company. Yet the company succeeded in spite of that. And we took this gamble and said, here's a company that already has revenue and an amazing reputation for service and support to their customers, remarkably good SEO on the marketing side, some things missing on the marketing side that we could bring to the table. But could we go into a company like that was already formed and have this sort of 9-person team? And that's been really a surprise. It really sort of says, man, we could start on the 100-yard dash of the startup here. We could start 20 or 30 or 40 yards down the line with a company that's more developed if it's got the right raw material and right people. And as we came in and started doing the actual things you should do when you're not a developer fiefdom, like listening to the customer service people and actually trying to understand what their pain was and what the reflected pain of the customers was, and started listening to the marketing people and activating the marketing people to go out and just do customer discovery calls and listen to the marketplace, watching that team just like unfold and just become ridiculously powerful. It's one of the things I'm most excited about with what they're capable of, because they've been together for years and they love the process now of what technology that's user-centered design and responsive and listening to the marketplace can actually bring to the business. We just have to deliver that now, but we're well on the way. And I think that's the other surprise and delight. And it sort of, like you heard me say in my group 3, it probably changes my target filter. I would love to find businesses in that $1 million to $4 million range where we can truly add value and get credit for it.
Awesome. Thank you. But I lied. I do have one more Starts question, which I forgot. I apologize. Not really. Okay. So a couple of weeks ago, you said something that surprised me when you said it. And it's kind of also a vulnerable moment. So I'm going to now put that on the air. It's going to be fantastic. We were talking about Starts and some of the success and some of the challenges and raising venture capital and making investments. And I think Jacob was with us, and he said something about, like, what if you went out to the coast and took some of these experiences and talked with other, like, quote, real VCs, right? And you said something that I'm not going to try to quote you, but the gist of what you said was like something like, I don't know that I'm ready to play with the big boys, right? You had a little bit, like, you checked your ego pretty hard around, like, maybe you're not worthy to sit with that group, which is interesting to me, because when I look at your background, and I know you pretty well, I think as much as some people in your life, I wouldn't have any of that hesitation. So I wonder what goes through your mind when you think of that. of like, well, what if you did go out and suddenly you're sitting with Paul Graham, or maybe somebody not as intimidating as Paul Graham, but like, you're sitting with some of those guys out there talking about, your deals.
Letting Chris Sacca redo my pitch for me.
Yeah, letting Chris Sacca do. We just get you on Give Up Media and let Chris Sacca do your pitch for you. Yeah, like, but when you're thinking about if you did have an opportunity to sit with those guys and talk about deals, would you have that kind of self-conscious, like, well, I'm in Indiana and these are really small deals. They're like, $1 million, not $100 million. Like, is that in there? And if so, why do you think that is?
I think I might have said something along the lines of, I'm not ready to play in the majors again yet. If you look at VC deals in 2006, we raised $17 million on a $15 million pre. That's in the top, probably for a Series A deal. That was probably in the top 20% of the deals in 2006, right? It was a Series VC deal. We only talked to 5 VCs. We had 4 term sheets. It was playing in the big leagues, and I played. And you've heard the stories of,
don't do it. But yes, I've heard the stories.
Well, just walking into the room of the CEOs of the VC firm, where half the CEOs are original founders and half are the professional replacements. And the famous story I tell is it was the first one I went to when I mentioned my forecast that we'd raised money on, and the professional VCs looked at me and said, "Yeah, well, what's your reforecast?" And I was like, "Reforecast?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And the game is, you have this amazing forecast that's your best case scenario. You've sold it on a term sheet. The VCs have bought it. It always takes 60 or 90 or 120 days to close the deal. And during that time, if you're a professional CEO and you want to survive, you reforecast, which means, hey guys, we didn't get the money when we thought we would 3 months ago. Let me show you my hockey stick that's now been stretched by 9 months. So my first year is a gimme. I'm going to make my first year numbers no matter what. And my second year numbers are 60% lower than they were. And that's the number you start sitting at your first board meeting. I'd never done that. And like, you could just see the guys around the table go, oh, I guess he's not going to be here for long. I lasted for 3.5 years. I think I probably beat the over under because they were probably thinking like year and a half, this guy's gone. But it was like, that's the big leagues, right? That was stuff but now I know that, right? But I don't know some of the other things I haven't learned. And when 2009 hit, I still had money. The famous story is I had, in the cram down round at Interactions, I had to write a $400,000 check, and I could not look my wife in the face or convince myself to do it. It'd be worth 40 or 50 or 60 million bucks today. And I just couldn't write the check in 2009 because I had 4 boys. I had college coming up. I had to figure out what to do. So I purposely said, I'm going to start a services company with some great guys and call it DeveloperTown because, lifestyle business with equity upside, that'll be easy, until 2012, 13, and 14 hit. But I think for me, I'm still in that phase of saying, I've got 5 more years with kids at home. We've gotten to stability. We've gotten to places where we've got good cash flow. At some point, I'm going to take a swing again at the majors. I think there's one more in me to swing at the majors, but just not yet. I think I want to play that game. I want to go for something could be $1 billion business again someday. Just not yet. It's not the right time. And I think right now, in terms of our deals, the deals we're doing are tiny, not because it's Indiana or not because the deals we've chosen. It's because we're early. We had a VC firm in yesterday from LA with, they just raised their 4th fund, $385 million. And they insisted on coming to visit. And, it was a super bright MBA out of Notre Dame. And she's sitting there and I was like, so look, this is not going to be your deal, at least not for 2 or 3 years, because you want to put $5 to $15 million into your first check, which means you have a $10 to $30 million target investment size. And we're not ready for that with any of our companies for at least 2 years, maybe 3. But I'm glad to get to know you and we want to talk. We're just not ready to play there because we're down here. We're in about $20,000 a month recurring revenue. You're not going to touch our deal till we're at $400,000 a month recurring revenue, or maybe they say 400,000. We'd probably be in a 250 or 300,000 with fast growth. But we're a ways away from that on all of our companies. So that's not out of any embarrassment or saying, oh no, this is all bush league stuff. It's just, I've got 8 companies. 2 of them I want to get to that level in the next 2 years, but it's just going to take 2 years to get them to where they're even credible in taking a round that size.
Thanks. I'm really glad I asked that question. Let's go back to interactions. What do you think when you look back at that experience with a little bit of distance? What do you think were some of your biggest lessons from that experience?
Well, I think I learned an enormous amount about the VC process. I gained a real understanding of what it was. And I have the recognition now that, when you do a Series A, you've effectively sold your company, even though at the time, we'd only sold 40% of the company and still had 6%. With the Series A control provisions and the effective board management, you've sold your company. It's just a question of if you can keep all up rounds happening, you can maintain control of it. So I took away a lesson there of just understanding that when you take the professional money, it's not quite going public in terms of losing control of the company, but it's close. You've really lost the ability to control the company unless you can deliver results all the way up the chain, right? That's the only way you're going to do it. Any break in that upward chain, you're going to struggle with. And so just understanding that and how the mechanisms work was a huge takeaway. From me personally, I think I got the joy of spending a lot of money, of other people's money, to figure out my own weaknesses. This whole piece where I jokingly say I'm not a grown-up, I can't do companies when they're 50 to 100 employees. I've had people push back and say, you could do it if you just focused on it. And I say, I'm really not so sure. I think there's stuff that my ego would tell me I'm really good at, but there's stuff that I think it took me a lot of time and other people's money to figure out that I really just am not good at it, right? Like even if I focus, I would struggle to figure out how to not be deep in the weeds and micromanaging and trying to solve problems, which I'm good at, and instead try to manage through others and manage other leaders, right? I think that's the real thing I discovered is managing other leaders is an entirely different thing than solving problems. And so I think I took that lesson away for sure. Even the investors that put a lot of money in, I raised $32 million. It's gone on to raise another 100-some million more. They've even said, look, all day long, you should probably be executive chairman. Show up with a CEO that knows how to run a company and a product that you've invented. We'd reinvest any day of the week, but we don't want you to be CEO of it. We want you to be executive chairman, like set direction, set strategy, and build some amazing product, and they'd be all in. So, I left with that knowledge of saying, yeah, I think I'm still bankable, but the respect there is around the ability to find product market fit and innovative products, not around the ability to lead a team of 300 people. So that's hard to swallow with what I set out to do early days, but it's kind of cool knowing that cool. I know how I can make a ton of money and I know how I can change the world still. I'm just not going to be the guy that can actually transition from a 50 employee company to a 5,000 employee company.
You moved Interactions to Indianapolis, and I know you rattled off a couple of Midwest companies that were potential targets, and you've launched companies in Chicago. You ran a company in New Jersey and
Florida,
and acquired a really bad company in New Jersey. So, talk a little bit about that, maybe the Indianapolis tech scene, what you've grown to value here, what maybe if you could wave a magic wand and change, you might change, and a little bit about how you've seen it grow. I mean, DeveloperTown has been pretty central in the indie tech scene for the last 7 years. I like to think we played a small part in it, but I've never really asked you, from your perspective, having grown companies in Chicago and all over the country, is there anything here that is really unique or special, and what in particular might be frustrating?
Well, first of all, the move here was interesting. So I'd run my last company in Chicago, Interact, and started the company in New Jersey, and I grew it up in Ohio near Cincinnati. And when we moved, we considered Chicago, where I'd started a company, so I had a ton of business contacts, still had all that. And we got this right. This is not the state business environment where we ever would want to run a business. Why would you do this to yourself, to go into a place that's completely corrupt in terms of the politics and the shenanigans I saw when we tried to do a $500 million deal to sell it?
Chicago is what you're talking about,
Chicago.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I just didn't want to raise my kids in the Chicago suburbs, and I didn't want to raise a business in the Chicago and Illinois where, the primary way to turn over politicians is not elections, it's indictment. It's just not a place to run a business. And yeah, this is not winning me any friends in Illinois.
No, it's not.
But where, by the way, a significant amount of the investment in Starts has come from my friends in Illinois. So I should be careful to maybe, edit this part out just for the Illinois version. Yeah, make sure you broadcast the special Illinois version. But we got that one right. And at the time, Indiana we had Ohio, and Ohio's where I grew up. So I had, old school family connections in Ohio, Middletown, that area. In India, I had no connection at all. I mean, my wife was from Evansville, 3 hours away. Chicago was 3 hours away. Ohio was 3 hours away. But we thought, man, this is a place that is doing the right things. It was the Mitch Daniels years. We saw a business-friendly environment, low tax, and sort of government trying to support, get out of the way to let businesses go. And then Ohio showed up and offered us a tax package that was $2 million higher for interactions in Ohio than it was in Indy. And we actually sat down with the IEDC and said, okay, look, we just want to level with you. We want to live here for lifestyle reasons, but we now have a board of directors, and we can't go to our board of directors and say, because remember, this is the first thing we're doing after we raised $9 million in our Series A, and say, we want to take $2 million less in tax breaks because we want to live in Indiana. And they said, oh, sure, that's easy. You guys need to get more aggressive on your projections because our edge credits only pay off if you actually deliver the jobs. So do that, and we'll make sure we approve them. We did it. We got the tax credits approved. So it was now an even tax package, $5.5 million to $500 million in tax breaks that, again, you only collect if you deliver. Boom, we were able to move to Indy. And what's interesting is from a business environment and support from the government side, we got that right for probably the first 5 years, maybe 6, 7 years of being here. Ohio got their act together and went crazy with the, Third Frontier Fund and all the stuff they did, and really, in some ways, outdid state government support for entrepreneurship than Indiana did. But where I think Indiana continued to win was that the developing tech community in Indianapolis was, the old software artistry guys had morphed into a Primo and Exact Target, and you started seeing those transactions. You started seeing startups flourishing. And what I really loved about the Indiana tech scene was this sense of just camaraderie and support and help. I've never seen a community where startups could be directly competing with each other, and yet go complete open kimono and show people, here's what we're doing, what are you doing, and share and help and drive things. And I think in that sense, the Indianapolis tech community has something going for it in a big way. That sense of helping and sort of, camaraderie, peace, co-opetition.
All right, I'm going to switch gears again, go a little bit to your personal life, not family or anything, but like you're in a group with some other tech guys here in Indianapolis. I think you guys call it Forum. You don't have to talk specifics about anybody else that's in the group. I'd love to know a little bit about what you get out of that group. It's like a little CEO roundtable, right? Like, what do you get out of that group personally? How does it challenge you? And if you were talking to your founders at Starts about something similar that they should do, how would you talk to them about it?
The first rule of Forum, and that's we have one member who runs a PR advertising company who the rule is Forum is enforced by the fact that your picture and name will be on a billboard with the word liar next to it if you ever leak anything that happens at Forum. So you are in very dangerous ground.
I'm asking what you get out of it. Not
even the existence of Forum might put my name on a billboard, but I think I could probably get around that. But no, what I get out of it is exactly that, is that sense of safety, of being able to bring any issue at personal, family, business level, and there's a really cool zeitgeist thing there where people are Gestalt, where people are only allowed to share experiences. No one's allowed to give advice. So when you want to bring an issue up or talk about it, just having a group of people that you deeply respect who only share their experiences and what they took from it, not give advice at you, because it can be intimidating to take advice from 8 ways, like coming at you. But it's super powerful and it's great. It's something I really look forward to, and it's awesome that we all make the commitment to make the time happen. And you have to pay $100 if you're a minute late for the meeting, so we all get there on time and make it happen. So when I look at my founders, we wanted to try to get the founders themselves together more and working. And it hasn't really gelled. We've done it 4 or 5 times, but we haven't really gotten them together to really powwow in that sort of trusted sense together. And I'm pretty sure it's because you can't do it artificially. Like, you can't take folks that came together just because they happen to become co-founders with us and say, hey, why don't you guys have this trust relationship and go at this level? And I think I would encourage my founders to start finding it. And a few of them do have it. Some of them have it through, there's some religious-based organizations that some of the folks belong to that grab business leaders together and use the framework of a just and moral life and that's centered around a religious belief to have some of those conversations. And some of our founders are just well connected and have their peer group and friends. And a few of them have heard the structure. I've described the structure of how we actually do the CEO forum and have tried to go form some of those, but I don't think any of them have stuck really yet. In sort of that true as an exact replica of what we do in the forum that we're in. So anyway, it's I think it's super powerful to have a place that you can trust at that level with an enforcer in place to go talk through things and drive it.
What do you think makes it sticky for you guys? Why hasn't it, how long have you guys been doing it? 2 years? 3 years?
3
years.
3 years.
Why hasn't it dissolved yet?
Well, I would tell you that
because you're all pretty busy,
insanely busy
people, right? Like it's not
a huge commitment.
Exactly.
Yeah. We probably are going to lose 1 or 2 because they're so busy in their startup and they've blown it off. And once somebody blows it off enough times, you just can't trust them to show up and come in and do it. So we might be shrinking from 9 down to 7 or something, right? But
man, I hope you have those conversations before this airs.
Yeah. Maybe 9 down to 8. I don't know. But I think it's 2 ways. It's cathartic to be able to go talk about all the things that you can't talk about directly with people you work with directly. And so it just feels good to talk about an environment and do that. And then I think it's this sense of getting help and giving help of, it's kind of cool that lesson that you had that was super painful and you can describe like, well, my experience when XYZ happened was this and and this is what happened. And you just know by telling that story that maybe you help somebody out, right? And it's just, there's a good feeling to it. So I think it does have a dopamine high to it when you get to realize that thing that you thought sucked really, really bad ended up now having a little bit of a silver lining because you get to describe it to someone else and help them prevent that from happening. I think that's a big piece. And it's just a sense of, similar minded folks who are trying to make things happen and are doing it for the right reasons and want to make the world a better place but yet want to win while doing it. It's just fun to be in that crew.
How do you make the time, you personally?
By just blowing off all the stuff I promised to do for you and doing it.
See, I know that's not true.
It's true sometimes. I don't know. I just make the time, usually from not sleeping. But as what are we doing this interview at 11:18 at night? We're doing this interview, so there you go. No, I think it's it's just something you make the time. It's only once every, and frankly, it's supposed to be once every 6 weeks. It's supposed to be once a month, and it happens no more than once every 6 or 8 weeks. So we're not as good as we think we should be. And our one big retreat last year, one of the guys whose place was at got deathly ill right before, so we ended up canceling it. We had to we're supposed to do a 2-day retreat and actually go to Mexico somewhere. And I think that would be great to really clear your head and do that. But yeah, so we all make time and just make it happen. And some of it's the commitment to each other. Like, you can't use the "I'm busy" excuse with these guys because they're just as busy as you are. And if they're going to make time for it, how dare you say, "Oh, so I'm sorry, my shit's more important than your shit, so I'm gonna not show up for it." Right?
Yeah. Interesting. How does Elise feel about it?
I think she likes it. I think I think she likes it because I think she knows there's times when she's like, well, do you have anybody you just could just talk to about this stuff, right? Like, so when there's tensions between us, whatever, she's always like, well, you should have somebody you can talk to. And I think she knows that Forum fills a lot of that role, that I can go talk to somebody and be called on my crap when it's stupid, but also sometimes get the support when I'm right. Right. Like I think my wife's amazing. I married, as one of my good friends would say, I outpunted my coverage. My wife is phenomenal. And for her to have that awareness that is, it's a good outlet and is amazing to me.
On the topic of Elise, there's one of your personality traits that is interesting to me that I've noticed over the last 8 years now. You are probably one of the worst time management people I've ever met. I mean, it is sometimes a case study. I just sit there and smile just watching you work.
Professional time mismanager.
You have it as an art. Your ability to ignore the clock, other people, like just anything that's going on around you is amazing. And the one exception to that I've never seen not happen is your ability to drop everything for Elise. When she calls you, texts you, walks into the room, you will drop anything that you're doing to make time for her. Where does that come from? Like, how do you do that? It's such singular focus in a way that I've never seen you in any other segment of your life.
Can we say that louder so she hears that? Like, yeah.
But seriously, like, where do you think that comes from? And do you have to work at it? Like, is it hard? Like, do you consciously think about it?
Well, I mean, there is the conscious rule we have, which is 2 rings in a row on my phone. I always will drop anything I'm doing, period. And she knows not to call me twice in a row unless she needs me to drop out of whatever I'm doing, no matter what. So I do have permission to ignore phone calls from her or ignore texts until she rings twice. And then, so for her to have the safety of a system that she can always give me when she knows she needs me, is helpful. And then for me, it sounds like I'm just, trying to suck up to my wife, but I am truly blessed to have found my wife. She's phenomenal. She's the best, partner, friend I could have ever had in my life. And so there's a sense of, I probably shouldn't mess that up. You've seen my complete lack of awareness of other people when I look at you and I will say, like, why is that person crying? And I have no clue. And you're like, duh. Right. And
true story.
That's all true. Yeah. And so when I first got married, have you ever heard me tell that story? When I first got married, my wife caught me, to tell you how bizarre my brain is. She caught me when she said, hey, could you pick up your towel and hang it up? And I was like, okay. And there's this little pause. And she looked at me like, this is our first 6 months of marriage. She's like, what was that? And I'm like, I was just thinking about hanging up the towel. She's like, what do you mean? And I was like, I rattled off the list. I was like, yeah, I put the cap on the toothpaste. I hang up the towel. I do this. I do that. And I was just making this list. And she just, like, for her, it was this moment when she was like, first of all, what have I married? But no, like, there was this moment she was like, oh my God, like his brain, like for her, she looks through a room and she's saying, what do I do to make this better? And she sees the things to do. I don't. They're invisible to me. It's the list of the things I have to do. And when I first got married, I was like, I'm not going to screw this up. This amazing woman. Like, I'm a nerd from high school and I've got the prettiest girl to dance is like talking to me. Like, I'm not going to screw it up. So I was making a list of all the things I'm going to do. And she busted me on it just because she caught the little hesitation, right? When I was like digital processing, putting this on the list. And so, yeah, I think if that tells you anything, do I have to work at it? Maybe it's just those lists are now ingrained, whatever. But, and trust me, the lists don't function all the time. I screw it up plenty of times, but we figured out how to make it work. And yeah, it's phenomenal.
One of the things that I think is interesting about our differences is I was thinking about how I would ask this question. I feel like I see the world in like abstract paintings, and I feel like you view the world in realism. So I tend to like if I think of a number, I would say, Michael, that's like $700, and you would say, no, that was $647, and if anything, you would round down. Right. So you see things in very, very detailed specifics and you remember them that way. Like, you don't just see them that way. You also file them away in their specificity. And I don't think you have an idyllic memory, but almost to that level of detail. Do you have an idyllic memory? No. Okay.
Well, for things I'm interested in, I do have a really good memory for specifics on things I'm interested in.
And I don't, right? And I know this frustrates you, like, because I'll remember like a pattern, and I'll say like, no, it's like it's like this, and that can be sometimes frustrating. Did you have to train that, like your ability to remember the specifics and like be able to go down to that level of detail when you need to? Is that just come naturally for you, or is that something where early on you said, no, I want this superpower, I want to be able to do this?
I don't know if it's a combination of working at it or not. Like I do exactly what you're talking about. It's one of the things, Adam as a designer is a guy who could deal with great concept wireframes and do that. And then it drives him crazy when I can pull out the specifics of, right, but we have handled this case or that case or this case or this case or that case. And I can rattle off 7 of them. And then he's only going to remember the vague overs, so he'll come back with 3 of them. And it takes a long time for us to get all 7 of them in place, but some of them are critical for the process. And I think what I've had to work at, if anything, is understanding that opposite, or not opposite, the different thought process, right? Just to understand it. Like it's something that I admire about you, is that ability to just say, yeah, I've got this concept and this principle and I can represent it this way. And it causes the moments when you look at me and I'm like, of course, did you think I was actually saying that? Like I was saying the concept, and I was like, but you said $700. It was $647. Like, like that's the breakdown that we see. So, but when I was in kindergarten, I was fascinated in numbers. And so we talk about training. So my mom used to double numbers with me, talk about being a geek from early days. So, I would start 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, and she would lose it at, 262,144. Is that right? I think that's right. Yeah. So, and then she would start getting out either a pencil and paper, and I'd be in the millions in my head, just trying to see how far I could double the number 2 up into the numbers and keep track of all the digits in my head.
I would be money at that game if we started with the number 10. I could destroy it.
If you're doubling, you're still going to go 10, 20, 40, 60.
Yeah, that's fine.
To just add a 0, 2,600,000.
All right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Anyway, but it, if you just did 10, 100,000, 10,000, 100,000, that would work. So I don't know. There was that weird math gene that, is there in my head that makes me literal, and it causes me the problem the other way.
But it's not just math. Like you can also do it with conversations that you and I have had.
Yeah, literalness. Literalness, and the thing is, but I think that way. So then, like, when I feel it's clear, I'm giving examples, and I'll say like, well, yeah, like, what if we were able to give you $50,000 and add another $50,000? And I'm like, well, of course, I'm just throwing numbers in there to be literal so I can do math off of them. I'm not throwing actual numbers. I'm throwing concept numbers, and everybody interprets them literally. So I have the exact problem the other direction, because I can't actually talk unless I do something literal. And yet I'm trying to explain concept, but I use literal. So I don't know. That's a weird quirk. One of many that are out there.
How many people view that as a negotiation tactic when you do it?
I've discovered on multiple occasions after the fact that I'm a brilliant negotiator. And at the time, I was like, damn, I wish I could have been that intentional in the thing I was actually saying or doing. And it's so, yes, some people have viewed it as a negotiation tactic after the fact. And more often than not, or more often than I should, I've gotten lucky that it was somehow the right tactic to use, even though there was no intentionality. People assumed I was playing some deep, long game with these numbers and moving people, nudging them. And I just got lucky that it worked out. Right. And so.
How much of that literalness, or how much do you think that literalness has affected your ability to give people feedback? And specifically, I'll point to years of listening to startup pitches with you, where it almost felt like 2 Michael Clorans could enter the room. The one that cared about you as a human being and didn't, was going to crush your dreams. That was just a given, but wanted to do it in a way that left you happy and smiling as a human being. and then the one that showed up that was just like, nope, you're launching a two-sided marketplace. I'm just going to crush your dreams. And you have gotten somewhat of a reputation for that based on a couple of meetings where maybe you weren't as gentle as you wanted to be. How much of that is tied to that literalness, or do you think that's something else?
That's tied to the days that I remember my list versus the days that I don't. So when I remember my list of, I need to have this conversation where one of the checkboxes is, I'm going to beat this idea up because I want to make sure that you don't spend 2 years of your life on something, and I'm going to beat it up so that we can find the gem in there. And if it's something works, then I can become the world's biggest fan. If I remember to follow that list and that formula that I discovered after finding out, a year and a half later that I had the reputation for me as, I don't want to talk to that asshole. Like I just realized that what I thought was really, really valuable, and it is objectively really, really valuable.
It is valuable.
Wasn't being perceived that way just because of that. And it's something that I really hate, that if I'm having a distracted day or not focused on it and forget that stuff, then I end up just still doing what I do, but I end up not being nearly as valuable because of just the way I get people to react to it. Right. And why is that person crying? Like that it sucks. I mean, that's just a horrible, awful thing. And it's some, my mother used to say, I think you've got some little touch of autism in there. It's like something, right? She's like, you're somewhere on the spectrum. And I'm sure today I would probably be diagnosed somewhere in there, right? Just because of that sometimes that inability it just takes that conscious effort to read people.
So you certainly aren't unique in that, right? And we all have our own quirks, right? Like myself included. So how do you train yourself or teach yourself or constantly enforce that with yourself to remember the checklist? What are some of the techniques you use to keep that top of mind?
It helps to have a really great partner that beats the tar out of you occasionally for doing it. It keeps things top of mind really well. Or the nice version of that is, I have learned a ton from working with you, from working with other folks that are able to do it, from Jim Dreher having the butthead signal of tugging his ear, which is like you're being a butthead. Or if I didn't catch the ear tug, he would just say butthead in a conversation and work that into the conversation casually, and no one would notice hardly. And then I'd be like, oh, I should stop being a butthead. I'm going to start doing this, right? So there's been folks that figure me out, and there's people that I've worked with for years and years and years, and on multiple startups, and it's great. And there's people that I've broken that would never work with me again, and those are heartbreaking, right? It's just awful. Just because the biggest thing that you pointed out to me was that once you figure out that there's never malice of intent, right? That there's no malice of intent ever there. It's like I want to do the best thing, and then it's much easier to deal, right? To deal with and do that. So yeah, I think that's it's years of just learning it, right? Of just gradually building up that list internally.
I think one of my favorite moments, and one of my least favorite moments, by the way, one of my least favorite moments in our relationship is when you were recognized on stage for being one of the great, brilliant minds in software testing. That was awesome for me, by the way. Thank you for that. And then that was offset. So the offsetting penalty for that for me was when you came to me once in passing, or I think you and I were walking out of a meeting together, and you said something like, you didn't say anything to that founder that I wouldn't have said. And they shook your hand and they thanked you for it, and they might have hugged you. Like, they were so grateful. You didn't say anything I didn't say. For me, that was like a big, like, oh, thanks, man. Like that made me stand a little taller. That was great.
Yes. Or the 100 people that are like, great and awesome Mike Kelly, which I want to talk to you about my next idea, because I'm not ready to talk to that Cloran guy, right? Like that.
I know, which is crazy, yeah. Right? Because like if it were my startup, if it were me, I would be like, get in the room with Michael Cloran, like spend that time. I'm great as a sounding board, but I'm not Mike, right? Like, it's just not going to be the same. So I think
you understand how much you've become the my version of being recognized on stage is I know how to build quality software. I think you're getting there pretty darn fast.
I have the halo effect.
It's going to pain me when that happens.
All right. Let's see. We're about an hour and 40 minutes in. I hit all of my key questions. Anything we didn't touch on that you thought we would have or should have?
Is this still a Startup Competitors podcast? Is that what we're doing?
This is. Yep. You want to talk a little bit about competition?
Well, I've listened to some of the early podcasts, and I think you've hit an amazing number of competitor things. I think, I don't know, you've got a few more in the can that I haven't heard yet, but I think what's interesting, with Startup Competitors, have you hit sort of what happens if there's one or two well-funded competitors in the space, but not 10? So sort of the validation effects of competition sometimes.
So we've found it in our reports that we've run. Like Steve and I found it in the data. So we've hit those cases where, people have submitted an idea and it's like, okay, there's 100 of them. That's like the hard part is picking which are the closest, 10, like the best 10 competitors. And then we just recently hit one where it was like, there's only like four that we can find, right? Like, and only one of them is like really getting after it, and the other three are, for whatever reason, not so successful. And then we have to struggle to find like, okay, who's competing for the same dollar with the same buyer?
Yeah, so they're very complementary products or substitute products.
Exactly. And so those have been interesting for us. But I would say, we've seen it as tremendous validation, but then we've also seen it as potentially a warning sign. We've seen it as both because it depends on how successvel they are. It's also a warning sign.
If there's nothing there, that's a warning sign. And if there's too much there,
or if there's 4 of them and all 4 of them are struggling.
Right.
Like what makes you think you're going to be the next?
Right.
What are you doing different that's going to solve the problem that the other 4 are facing?
And what about in terms of with some of the other founders? Have you hit the why now? So you found competitors, but they were from the past and they might have failed. So I think that's an interesting thing we see a lot is that you see the pattern, right? Is idea tried, failed.
Yeah.
Idea tried by 30 people, failed. Idea tried again 4 years later and succeeds.
So it was an interesting one. Stephanie Cummings, who was the very first Startup Competitors podcast, she's amazing. Like just her background and what she's done with that company already, she's pretty cool. It's worth a listen if you haven't listened to episode 1. Forgive me for some of the audio quality if you go back there. But what's interesting is Stephanie is basically doing Uber for maids, right? Is a really bad way of saying it, but it's cleaning service on demand. And she's selling to corporate clients. So she's going into a multifamily location and saying, we're going to provide this service to the building, right? And it's something that you can schedule or you can do on demand, or like there's a number of ways to do it. And then they've done some other interesting things like it's always 2 people at one time. That way there's less risk of theft and things like that. They all wear personal cameras. So like personal body cameras. Oh, wow. So if you say they stole my laptop, they just replay the footage, right?
Never happened like it did 3 months ago to us.
Yeah. So she's done a lot of things that are really right, and she's, I think, still seeing the rewards of that, which is amazing. The reason why I bring her up is because at the same time I was interviewing Stephanie for Startup Competitors, we actually had somebody submit an Uber for Maids idea to Startup Competitors that we ran the search on. So we basically did it. And there's like 100 of them. Again, it's one of those spaces where like you pick a market and you can find somebody doing it.
Uber for you.
Yep. Well, no, like even Uber for Maids, pick a market. Like there's one launching in Nashville. There's one launching in New York. There's one. Every market has one that's launching. Because and you think about it, it's a low cost of overhead to launch that business, right? Yeah. And so we did the search. Of course, there's tons of competitors. Some of them ridiculously well funded, but still super niche. Like I think Alfred in New York, right? But is really kind of still only in New York. Hasn't really gone outside of that. In a bunch. And then what was interesting about Uber for Maids is like the graveyard is spectacular of companies that have done it, gone out of business. And of course, one of the things we do in our research is we'll pull like the founder's blog where he wrote the goodbye letter and like what went wrong and stuff like that. If we can find it, right? Like that stuff is just priceless, about like the insights you get from the business model and like, or the other half of the time, the founding team just imploded. And so one of the things we do is we lay out this matrix of features. So we'll do this feature comparison of like, so for Uber for Maids, I'm doing this from memory. So, and you know, how well I remember specifics.
Concept, not literals.
Yeah. Look at concept, not literals. So give me some forgiveness here, but it's basically like, you know, on-demand service is one kind of feature category. Ability to schedule recurring service is one. Eco-friendly options, right? Like, so they're not going to use bleach. They're going to use some alternative cleaner.
Body cameras,
security. Like, so you think of the 7 things that would differentiate one of these products. One of those classifications was commercial versus residential. And so when we looked at it for the pitch that we got, we ended up putting together a deck that said, because this guy literally wanted to be like, if you looked at all of these check boxes, right? So if you wanted to own all 7 of those check boxes, the best competitor for you is going to be the one who also owns all 7 of those check boxes, right? And so when we looked at the market and we laid all those out and we said, where is everybody in this market? For the person who submitted the idea, we were like, for the love of God, don't do it. Like, this is this is an awful idea. You have to find a wedge. Like, you can't just pursue this as is. Like, maybe there's something here, but you haven't found it yet, right? So keep fishing. But of course, in the loving, kind way that you can only do with 500 words and not as direct as I just did it, right? Of course, I'm interviewing Stephanie, and like, I'm looking at the same chart, and it's like, this data would tell me that she should do it, because there was only one competitor who's going after commercial, after multifamily.
There's only focus there.
Right. There was only one. Like, and I think they were in Australia, if memory serves correctly. And so like, is Stephanie going to be successful? Is that company going to take over the world? Who can possibly know? But does she have a unique wedge in this market that nobody else is doing? Yes. Right. And like, that to me was the exciting part. So like the same data, the exact same data that can refute one person's startup, it would just, with that different wedge, finding the thing that's going to get you excited about this idea and how it can conquer the incredible, overwhelming challenges of a startup. Like, that can give you hope that like, oh, okay, you can be successful now. Like, so that's one of the more interesting examples that we pulled, where it was like, and it was just a total fluke that I was talking to 2 companies at the same time about the same space. I think that was a fluke. Maybe that'll happen more, but like, it was really exciting for me to see like, hey, this could be really powerful. How if a founder got this data and they were smart enough to look at it, not from like the eyes of, does this prove or disprove my theory, but instead looked at it from the eyes of, well, I now just got a bunch of data. Where's the opportunity in this data? Like, what is this telling me the opportunity is? Not does it prove what I wanted to do, but like, is there something here that I've never seen before or that I wasn't thinking of? And if somebody could look at it from that perspective, I think you could learn some really interesting things about the industry that you were thinking about going after.
The story that comes to mind, I was trying to think of a way to tell this opaquely enough without getting in trouble. So I can't. So I'm just going to tell the story, and the CEO can punch me in the face for it later. But we had a CEO come in who was Uber for a certain service, and it was all personas, all versions of the service, and was going to like just do it all, everything. And we basically looked at his last 2 years of doing the business, and there was a single type of organization and a single service. And it took us 2 months with occasional relapses over time back to it to convince him that it was like, no, the business is this one persona, this one service. And that business alone is probably $100 million market, which means the most will ever be is 10 or 20 million in it. And that'd be unbelievable, because 3 years later, it can turn into one more persona, one more market every year from then on, right? And change and become a $100 million, $200 million business. But it was exactly that. It was that, like you're saying, it's just that one target, just commercial, just there. And it was a game changer for that business. And that level of focus is why we've been able to get to, 10K recurring revenue in 7 months, and we'll probably be at 80K recurring revenue in 19 months. It's pretty cool. $80K a month recurring revenue, $1 million, break through the $1 million mark. And that's going to be with just our investment plus his investment, no outside money. And if we pour money on it, I think we grow even faster. So you're right. There's huge power in that from competitive differentiation through that focus piece and pulling that off. I think the rest of the competitive analysis that I've noticed creeping in a little bit late in your interviews is how do you keep up with your competitors? Like, how do you keep up with what's going on? Your answers have ranged from, I don't really care, I'm just going to focus on what I'm doing and ignore the competitors, to people that say, oh yeah, I've got a system in place to actually monitor competitors, which I question whether they really do or not. But it is incredibly tough in a relatively busy, crowded space to keep up with competitors. And I think there's some version out there of the startup competitors right now as an episodic kickoff kind of thing. I think there's that monitoring service that I think is really interesting for a lot of startups to figure out if you can create value for people along the journey from competitive intel.
I'd like to do that someday. I also had an interesting request today from a corporate prospect who asked if we did industry reports, like pick ed tech. What are your two industries? Photography and education. So like, what if we wanted to buy like the Q3 2018 photography report that basically just looks at the latest trends in photography related startups, right? And like what's happening there, which is interesting because that gets very much into like classic market research, like Gartner type studies and forecasting and stuff like that. But it got me thinking about like, because I don't want to do that. That's a whole thing, right? That I'm definitely not qualified to do. But it did get me thinking of like some interesting things you could do, maybe specific to so again, like going after like what's everything that's happening in education. I can't touch that. I don't think, right? Like not believably for me right now. But what it did get me thinking of is like, if you just focused on education related SaaS product companies and you started to take some of the things that we're learning how to do on a much, much smaller scale, like where you lay out the features of 10 products side by side and you try to map those, which it turns out is actually pretty darn hard because like even if you look at something like DevOps, where we just recently did a DevOps one, and you might have somebody who's got artificial intelligence in theirs and somebody who doesn't. So do you call out artificial intelligence as its own row and you only check that box for that one competitor? Or do you take the thing that they have artificial intelligence around, which is proactive alerting, and you say, well,
asterisk, it's with artificial intelligence.
Right. It's just proactive alerting, which everybody has.
But theirs has an asterisk.
Theirs has an asterisk, right? AI. So you get these interesting questions, which is like, how do you classify this stuff in a meaningful way, which turns out to be really hard, right? Especially because you're trying to identify where's the opportunity in this market. Yeah. So you don't want to do a hand wave, right?
Knowledge taxonomies are hard in the chessboard made out of smoke that is the startup. It's really hard to do a taxonomy.
But it did get me thinking like, well, let's say we had done 30 of those reports for education companies and we've built 30 of those taxonomies. What if you could lay all those out side by side now, and instead of looking at 10 companies, you were looking at 300 companies, and half of the work is already done because you've already done the first pass. It's a 2-pass algorithm, right? You've done the 1 pass, which is I'm going to lay all these similar things out side by side. Now I'm going to do the second pass, which is I'm going to now group these entire reports into categories. And these are ed tech companies going after students. And these are ed tech companies going after online education. And these are ed tech companies going after content creation, right? Or, whatever it is, right? And then when you do that, you start to see this tapestry emerge, and some of these, of course, are going to be crossover companies, and it's more like a Venn diagram than hard lines. And like that got me thinking of like, well, what if we did that? And like, what could that tell us that could be valuable, that could be something that we could sell as a general report, which is less kind of zoom out to 10,000 feet and look at the market of education, maybe, but is a little bit more like let's zoom out to 1,000 feet and look at the companies that have had the most success over the last few months and new entrants into the market, and what are they doing? Like what is new and exciting that people are launching, and then what's seeing the most success. And maybe that could be enough. And I could do that. Like we could put together a process and a team that could go after that.
Right. Yes. It's a short hop from the processes you're already running.
Yeah.
To do a lot of that. I think there's tremendous value in that. And what I learned 3 years ago from that marketplace, I think there's tremendous ways to monetize that. So we should talk.
It's really bugging me that I can't remember what that is.
When it's not recording.
All right.
Well, this has been fun. You made me keep talking and not get my second beer. So,
This has been good. All right. So parting thoughts. When you think about the things that you're excited about investing in 2018, 2019, if a founder was going to show up on your door and say, hey, I want Starts to be involved in this, like what would you want that to be in? Like what are some of the things that you would be excited to explore right now? What's top of mind for you?
AI-driven VR characters that are monetized through blockchain. Oh, sorry.
That's what's funny is there are 3 people in the car who just said, that's my startup. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah. Can I get a competitor report on that? So I would tell you that I believe that the primary defensible intellectual property going forward from this point, because software patents are so broken and the other pieces of intellectual property are harder and harder to defend. I think the primary intellectual property going forward are companies that have an analytics-driven approach to optimizing a process or an industry piece. And what I mean by that is building a software tool that's easy to use and it's great is like the ante anymore, right? Like you have to have that. But if you said, I'm going to be in the pick a space, the hiring space or the HR space, having software that's easy to use and does all the things is important to do and hard to build. But then half your development team should be people who actually are functioning as like, what if we were the best HR team in the world? What would we do? And how do we prove it? How do we experiment and analyze across our 1,000 or 10,000 or 50,000 customers to say, well, if I put a fruit basket on every employee's desk, that extra $80 that I spend for a new employee results in the following impacts. And it works in the healthcare industries in this industry, but it's actually completely negative when it's the construction industry. And then when you get that little nugget of knowledge, as stupid as that one is, but when you get that nugget of knowledge and you build that into your software and you start a process of just as much that you have a development team making an interface and making it easier to use and making it easier to click, you have a expertise team building and driving and building that expertise being built into your software is defensible intellectual property. You could have that same team writing best practices articles and putting on your blog, and that's fine, but only 1% of your customers are ever going to use it. But if that team is intimately involved and can, just like we want designers and developers to work together, if developers and that team can work together to say, I want you to implement this insight that no other team or person on the planet can have, because no one can work in a single career HR at 1,000 companies. Maybe you're going to work HR at 3 or 4 or 5 companies, and it's going to be at different levels of learning through your career. Maybe work with 20 colleagues or 30 colleagues, and most people are not going to process that in a fully rational way into the literal this works and this doesn't work in these situations at the subtlety. But today, when you run a SaaS company, a multi-tenant SaaS company, you get to watch thousands of people in a measurable way work. And you have to design software in a very specific way, a way where the measurements are comparable across those companies. You can't let every company define their own process completely separate, because then you can't ever derive the data. So you have to put some scaffolding in to do it. That's the stuff that excites me, because when you now see that, you end up with a company that someone else might be able to replicate the features and the functions, but that true knowledge of, if you do this, your sales team closes at 32% higher, or if you do this happens, and not because of some feature, but because of those subtle things that have been learned over time from thousands of companies distilled into your process and analyzed. And it's a weird team to find. You got to find somebody that's good in a subject matter in a domain, and they have an analytics bent to actually analyze the numbers to have the true rational look. And I think startups that do that, it's a long road because a lot of times you have to get big enough as a SaaS startup to have enough experiences and data to matter. But I think if you design your software and build from that from the beginning, I think you can end up with truly defensible intellectual property. So I'm most excited about those. And if I was going to swing for the big leagues again at some point, I think there's a foundational set of technologies for building that style of startup that might be a product in and of itself that you could build numerous startups in numerous domains by building the foundational tools necessary to build that kind of a startup. So that's my most exciting thing that I'm after. I think my second most exciting thing that I'm interested in is people that are sitting on top of just this dramatically underutilized resources. The people with that $2 million or $4 million in revenue, with a customer base, with a team that knows how to service them, who is just begging for some user-centered design and a better product, or he just tweaks to their product and tweaks to their marketing and reach the market to just unlock instantly that doubling of value that you can get. That is so hard to get from 0 to 4 million, but getting from 4 million to 8 million is a dramatically easier piece when you see those missing elements. So I think I'm excited about finding those opportunities too.
Awesome. Thank you for coming on the podcast. I am continually amazed by you and seriously thankful I get a chance to work with you every single day.
The feeling's mutual because it's been a serious learning journey. Let's keep it going.
Thanks.
Thank you.
If you're thinking of launching a SaaS product, Startup Competitors can provide data on your closest competitors, survey potential users, or provide other product validation services. Learn more at startupcompetitors.com.